even still.
Imagine that you walk into your usual grocery store. You go through the doors, you get your cart, but as soon as you enter the aisles, you realize that something's definitely not right. There are only scraps of food on the shelves. Slightly disconcerted, you go to the next store, and the next, and the next. By now, you're experiencing a sinking sensation in your gut. Your body is initiating a stress response that will help you to cope with making difficult decisions. Where would you go? How would you find food? Humans have faced resource challenges throughout history, whether it be a lack of food, a lack of safety, or other destabilizing factors. You might not have thought much about the decisions that these people have had to make. They're difficult decisions, potentially life or death decisions. And they're complex. They involve equations about risks and resources, some of which you know, and some of which can really only be guessed at. As a biologist, I'm interested in how animals deal with unpredictable resources. And I study a model organism that has to make these decisions relatively frequently, to stay or to go. In doing so, I hope to better understand how and why animals make these decisions, and a little bit about how that might help them survive in an unpredictable world. Meet the red crossbill. This is a finch with a crossbill that it uses to pry open the scales of conifer cones and to access the seeds that are inside. And this is a very rich food resource, but it's also unpredictable, both in where across the entire continent the seeds will develop, and also in how long the cones will retain the seeds inside so that the crossbills can forage on them. So what happens when a crossbill finds itself in a situation of declining food? They're well known for long-distance nomadic migrations, and they're good at this. It helps them to locate these patchy resources. But migration, just like for people, is inherently risky. There may be unknown resources along the way, unknown predators, and there can be barriers to migration itself. The zebra finch, for example, faces an impassable barrier. This finch relies on green grass growth to reproduce, but it lives in the arid interior of Australia, and the rain that grows the green grass is extremely unpredictable and can be very rare. Whereas crossbills can be highly mobile and locate these patchy resources, zebra finches have to sit and wait, simply because there's not enough water to drink along the way. So this is a highly mobile species that can locate rich, patchy resources. But if migration is inherently risky, how do they make the decision to go? To risk the unknown over the known. Imagine if you had to make this decision. I'd bet a lot of money that you would not make this decision alone. You would ask your friends or your family first. And we have evidence that crossbills may be similarly influenced by those around them. If you experience a stressor, or a crossbill experiences a stressor, remember that sinking sensation in your gut? Your brain initiates a hormone cascade that ultimately releases a hormone called CORT. And CORT is going to help to coordinate the body's responses so that you can respond well to this stressor. CORT is going to tell energy-releasing cells to release energy into the bloodstream. It's going to help you to meet the energy challenge. But it's also going to shift behavior. What do we lose? Sex. Sorry. What do we gain? Survival. Finding food, and in the extreme, potentially having to make an escape migration to locate better conditions. The last thing that CORT does that's very important is that it feeds back and actually turns off that whole process. CORT feeds back and tells the brain regions that initiated its release that the job has been done and you can turn off. And this helps the body to return to a normal situation after the stressor has been removed. We have evidence that social cues can impact this entire process. If you take a crossbill and you put it in the lab and you limit how much food it has, so you're a red food-reduced bird, what you see is that those birds have an elevation in this stress hormone called cort. Food stress equals stress hormones. But what's interesting is that if you give this bird a neighbor that's either well-fed or similarly is food-reduced, we see a different response. Food-reduced birds that are paired with another food-reduced bird have a higher release of stress hormones than if the neighbor was well-fed, suggesting that these social cues are actually impacting how the bird is responding to the same stress. And it doesn't just happen in the blood, it also changes the brain. So remember this negative feedback loop. As cort elevates in the blood, the brain regions that control that cort have receptors for it. And so you need these receptors to detect the elevation of cort and to turn off the response. But if you have a food-reduced neighbor, the red bar, you actually have fewer cort receptors in these brain regions that control this response, suggesting that the social cues of having a reduced neighbor is actually changing the brain in a way that we think sensitizes the bird to subsequent stressors. If you don't have negative feedback or you have less negative feedback, you're going to have a longer and a larger release of these stress hormones. This might be a good thing for social species like a crossbill. If you have to move together, you have to make decisions together. So it might be a great thing for the mechanisms that contribute to those decisions to be sensitive to social information. So the million-dollar question, does this apply to people? And the short answer is that we don't know yet. We do know that the stress response is an ancient survival tool, and that many aspects of stress physiology are shared across vertebrate groups. We think we can learn a lot about ourselves by studying animal systems, but at the very least, it can provide an intriguing avenue for self-reflection. Humans are not immune to unpredictable events. Even if you're lucky enough to live in an area that's not war-torn or that's not economically unstable, there are other kinds of natural disasters. Fires and flooding are increasing in frequency with climate change, many of which are deadly. Hurricane Katrina killed 1,800 people. 40% of those were people who drowned, who either chose to stay or did not have the resources to be able to leave. People have to make these decisions. There may come a day when you have to make this decision. And the decision may not be as much yours as you might like to think. So you might ask yourself, who is your flock? How might they impact the decision that you make if disaster strikes? Thanks.